Let's get straight to the ongoing discussion and debate around the future of those Stage 3 tax cuts. Will the government deliver them as legislated and as promised, or are they looking seriously at changing them? Our political editor Andrew Clennell with me now, and you've got some fresh insight into all of this. Andrew, what's the situation? Talk us through it.
Well, there are serious discussions going on about amending the Stage 3 tax cuts either in October or in May. There is no decision made at this point, I can tell you, Kieran. The Prime Minister's personal preference is not to alter them, but he is getting advice from people who are telling him that interest rates could continue to rise if there is no change in relation to this. People who are concerned about the global situation when it comes to the interaction between monetary and fiscal policy everywhere. Now, I think the PM is well aware of the political risk in this, so there's no suggestion that Stage 3 tax cuts would be dumped in their entirety. I've also been told not on the cards is for a situation where there could be a higher tax rate on people, say, on more than 300,000 or 400,000, because it wouldn't raise enough revenue. It wouldn't tighten the budget sufficiently. So what we are perhaps looking at, if something occurs, and I stress it's if, is a change in the sliding scale. And I note that in recent days speculated on was from 200,000 a year to 180,000 a year, the 30% tax rate could be shifted down. So I don't know if that's one of the possibilities, but it is more likely to be that sort of change than a higher tax rate at the higher end. Now, I think a big influence on this is the Reserve Bank, because it's been put to me that it may be in a couple of years' time, Kieran, the Stage 3 tax cuts, but I think the Reserve Bank is telling the government that to have these tax cuts baked in is a risk towards higher interest rates. So Anthony Albanese and Jim Chalmers have the choice perhaps of giving the tax cuts and being told by the Reserve Bank, if you do that, that it'll come out of people's pockets in another way through higher interest rates. Let's hear Reserve Bank Governor Philip Lowe talk about this at a parliamentary hearing in September 16, urging the government to move on fiscal policy.
So the community wants all these things from our governments. It's understandable. What we haven't worked out as a community is how to pay for it. You can raise more taxes to pay for the things the community want. You can cut back in other areas. Both of these things are very difficult, aren't they? No one wants to pay more taxes and no one wants cutbacks in other areas. Or we can get the economy to grow more strongly so the pie's bigger. Each of those are very difficult, aren't they? Taxes, cutting back and structural reform. We have to do one of those three things, maybe all three of them, if we're going to pay for the goods and services that the community wants from our governments.
All right, has the Reserve Bank gotten a metaphorical gun to the government's head on this one? Jim Chalmers, we know he floated this balloon and changed his language a couple of days ago. It's been put to me that the Prime Minister didn't mind him doing that. As one source said to me, Kieran, Jim Chalmers is not a renegade. He's not going to come out and do this of his own volition. And so we saw it again today, him holding firm with that position. And again, I repeat, no decision has been made on this, but what's being considered is either keeping things status quo, an amendment to the Stage 3 tax cuts in October, or an amendment in May, not dumping the cuts. Here's Jim Chalmers today.
Well, I don't need permission to point out that every budget that we hand down, including the one that I'll hand down in less than 3 weeks' time, will put a premium on responsible economic management. My commitment to the Australian people, the government's commitment to the Australian people, is to do what we can to make sure that our budgets are responsible, affordable, sustainable and targeted to the economic conditions that we confront. I made that point earlier in the week in this room. I've been making that point for some time and I stand by that. When it comes to the Stage 3 tax cuts, our position hasn't changed. Secondly, the point that I've made, including this week, is that I think the global conditions have deteriorated sharply in the course of the last few weeks. And that's a point that has been made by the OECD, the IMF, the World Bank and others. Our expectations for the global economy have deteriorated even in the course of the last few weeks. And so in the context of all of that, we need to make sure we're building our buffers to the extent that we can against what might come at us over the course of the next couple of years.
So he talks about global deterioration. Well, as it's been put to me, there's never been this much tightening by this many central banks at once. And so while people in government, senior people in government admit it isn't exactly like the UK example, which I've been saying for a couple of days, the similarity is that fiscal and monetary policy must work together. Now, Brendan O'Connor was on the Skills Minister this morning on several morning programs, and he seemed to be pulling away from those Chalmers comments. This is where I thought the government would be pulling away from this particular balloon, but apparently not. He was saying, well, they're not for 2 years, the tax cuts, so it doesn't affect inflation. Now, it's similar to what Jim Chalmers said at a press conference in Canberra last week.
We've not changed our position in relation to stage 3 tax cuts. In fact, they're not obviously to take effect for almost 2 years, but we've committed to that position, and nothing's changed since we made that commitment. We've made a commitment to stage 3. We're looking at these things. Well, this would not be coming in until July 1, 2024. We're talking almost 2 years. We've got other matters to deal with, and we don't. And our position on this matter has not changed.
Well, it's still on the table. That's my information, and it's pretty good information. But the PM knows the political risk here. He also knows that the tax cuts start, which not many people seem to be acknowledging, with people on $45,000 a year. They aren't just for rich people. And here's the other side of the political risk. His promises to Kieran the week before the election and the week after, he wasn't going to move on these things.
You've told voters throughout the campaign that you are a man of your word. You've made public commitment that you're going to deliver those stage 3 tax cuts. I asked you this afternoon then, alongside those tax cuts, can you give an assurance to recipients of those that you won't increase the Medicare levy or an NDIS levy increase where you would be giving with one hand and taking with the other?
Yes, I can, Kieran. We're committed to delivering what we said we would. And I've said on the stage 3 tax cuts that they've been legislated. People are entitled to operate on the basis of that certainty.
Andrew, I'll be joined by the Deputy Liberal Leader Susan Lee in a moment. And the comments by her, by Peter Dutton, are a reminder of exactly that risk that you refer to, that the Prime Minister clearly is cognizant of, that political risk. We've seen it in recent history, haven't we? We spoke about it, you and I, yesterday, examples of where Prime Ministers have said one thing before the election only to do something different afterwards. I guess they will try, and if they do move on this, massage any change by saying they are committing to keeping stage 3, albeit with some potential amendments, Andrew.
Yeah, there's no doubt it can kill you, and it can kill you overnight, Kieran, politically. And it's not just Susan Lee and Peter Dutton who are saying it. We're speaking to Labor MPs, including on camera, who are saying it. Do not change the policy on these things. It's 2 years away. But it was interesting to hear that argument today that the Reserve Bank seems to be of the view, even if they're baked in 2 years from now, it makes a difference to the way we run monetary policy. You might think that's a bit rich from a guy, the governor, who basically said there'd be no rate rises until 2024, Kieran. But we've seen it with Julia Gillard and the carbon tax. She was ahead in the polls. She'd said no carbon tax under a government I lead. The slide started there, went very deep. Tony Abbott said no cuts to anything, did that first budget, 2014, I think it was. And it was a heavy cutting budget. None of it was promised at the election. That was a crisis for him. The only one who sort of got away with it is John Howard with the never ever GST, but he had to run another election to do it. So he said, never ever am I going for a GST before 96, but he didn't then introduce a GST. He got a mandate, even though he lost the popular vote, he won the majority of seats in 98. So there could be an argument that's what you have to do on this. But I can genuinely tell you, with the best of information before me, and this is what makes this so fascinating now, as the public debate rolls on, there is no firm decision on this. They could not do anything. They could leave it as is. They could change it as recently or as quickly as in 3 weeks' time, or they could change it in May. Those are the three options. But I'll tell you what, it'd have to be a hell of a sell job. Australians would have to feel they weren't being too badly ripped off. And I think you'd have to tie it to an argument like, if we don't do this, interest rates are going to go so high, you're going to lose the money anyway.
Yeah, and that in the context of, and you put it clearly before, there is a recognition within government that things are different between Australia and the UK, but there are still pressures here. That being said, I was interested to read in the Australian today that analysis by ANZ head of Australian economist David Plank, who says by 2024 the consensus view is that the economy would be very weak, and that tax cuts that the timing for tax cuts would be good by then. So it's the current environment is one thing, but then when you hear analysis like that, and from others, that by 2024 it's an entirely different kettle of fish, they've got to grapple with that too, Andrew.
I think it's why you and I have always thought that if there was going to be a move on this, and it would probably be very politically unwise, Kieran, it would be in May, when you were closer to that point. I mean, the point's been made this morning, as you're saying, there's 3 budgets to go before these even come into play. And we saw from Philip Lowe's assessment, if he is indeed, as I understand, one of those giving advice, it's pretty hard to give advice 3 years out that's accurate.
Andrew Clennell, thank you. We'll chat to you later in the program.